My name is Assemblyman Troy Singleton. One of the great mysteries of American lexicon is what is a hero. Too often when you think about it in the terms of sports, we see multi-million-dollar athletes and are coined the phrase hero. When we think about today's movie actors and those we see on the screen, we're quick to link the latest action star as a hero. But what if the definition of hero is something more, something deeper? Heroes are individuals who do a lot of ordinary things extraordinarily well under difficult circumstances. You're about to hear the story of such an individual, an American hero and a patriot, and my friend, Bob Yancey. Since World War II, Bob Yancey has stood up for his country and defended the ideals of the American way, unabashedly and unequivocally standing up in the face of danger. I'm proud to be one of his mentees, not by any word that Bob has ever given to me, but by his example of shining diligence, patriotism, and what it means to be a true hero. I welcome you to the story of my friend, Bob Yancey.
They gave me all kind of award because I never lost a patient. I got every last one of them out of there. Hey, and I never forget how them guys looked at me.
Hello, I'm Mike Panarello with the Armed Forces Heritage House Museum. I'm here to interview a very, very honorable man, a great guy. He's also a veteran of 3 wars. Mr. Yancey, there's so much about you that we need to talk about and need to cover. And first of all, I say that fighting in 3 wars, I mean, how does that has affected you over the years, being a veteran of 3 wars? Right in a way, that's an accomplishment.
Yes, the fact remained is that I had no choice. I just came up in that era of time where I just fell right in the place, and I dealt with it, and thank God I survived.
Now we were going to talk about. I know you started with the Navy, then you switched over to the Army, which I'd like to talk about. But now, how old were you when you entered World War II? How old?
18 years of age.
18 years of age. And originally you went into the Navy. What was your MOS with the Navy?
Cook. Well, at that time, an African American in the Navy could only be a cook or a steward. I think it's most obvious as to what I was.
Yeah. Now, you had a combat readiness position. What was that? And how did you end up? You ended up manning a deck gun, an anti-aircraft gun.
Well, first of all, when I was drafted in the Navy, they were so hard up for men at that time. I never went to boot camp. I got all my training aboard ship. Wow, yeah. At a battle station, they sent me down. They put me down in a hole, passing up ammo. I was on a submarine chaser, 175 feet long and 25 feet wide. I had a 3-inch 50 gun on the forecastle. He said, "Where do you want to be?" I said, "Anti-aircraft gun number 1. He said, "You don't know anything about that gun." I said, "I'm not stupid. I learned like anybody else." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have target practice for 3 days and a couple of days before the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines."
Right.
Well, he said, "If you get that target," he says, "you can have that gun." I said, "Fair enough." And lo and behold, they brought this Piper plane in, pulling the cable, 350-foot cable. And the objective is when the plane gets midship, the holler commence firing, so you'd be firing at the target. When the target gets midship, the holler cease firing. But I didn't hear him. I kept on firing. Next thing you know, the plane is doing like this, trying to get out of my way.
Right.
So finally, they got me stopped, and the skipper said, "Yancey," he said, "you didn't get the target." He said, "But you tried so doggone hard. We're going to give you that gun so you can get a Japanese plane instead of trying to knock one of ours out the sky."
And
so
you end up getting a Japanese. How did that happen? What occurred there?
Well, during the invasion of Leyte, they're having an abundance of Japanese planes. All you could see in the sky was a lot of dogfights. with the American planes and the Japanese planes. And lo and behold, the Japs really got smart, and they started coming in at to lower the mass of the ships. When they come in to lower the mass of the ship, they knew right well you couldn't fire because you fired your own ships. You had to wait till they pull up.
Right.
And when they pulled up, they knew it was all over.
Right.
Because there's 800, 900 ships out there.
Right.
Ain't no way, there's no escape.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the way it went down. That's how come they lost so many planes.
Now, was this before the kamikazes entered in, or was it the kamikaze planes came later?
No, they came at that time.
At that time?
Yes.
So the plane that you were shooting at was making a strafing run or a bombing run?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And they make suicide dives on the ships and so forth. When they make those suicide dives, you know, they try to hit the turrets of the ships, therefore knocking their guns out of position.
Right.
You see bodies flying in the air and everything else flying in the air when they make them suicide dives.
Okay, now you're 18 years old, you're manning a deck gun, there's kamikazes, there's, you know, Japanese planes all over the place. You know, what's gone through your mind? Jeez.
Survival of the fittest. How do I survive this here? And that's where you make contact with the man upstairs.
World War II ends. Where were you when the war was over?
I was in the China Sea with 1945.
Mm-hmm.
It was right after the invasion of Okinawa.
Right.
At that time, we had what they call a typhoon.
Right. Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, and 3 ships capsized, 3 destroyers. So we were tied to the lifelines and throwing heaving lines over to try to get the guys out of the water. The heaving lines are 100 feet long. The waves would carry us 50, 60 feet up in the air.
Right.
And the guys would be down there in what we call a swall. Down there, he'd be so far down there, you'd have missed him 100 feet.
I imagine that was just as scary as combat.
Oh, my, sure. Because the waves would wash over you. If you weren't tied to the lifeline, you'd be gone.
Now, war's over from 45 to 50. Were you in the Army or the Navy?
45 to 50. I made the transition in 1950.
Why did you, after so many years in the Navy, decide to join the Army?
As I always say, I couldn't drink all that water. But to answer your question, I was after the war was over. You got points. Who went home and who didn't.
Right.
And the points consist of, you know, where you're married, how many battles you've been in, et cetera, et cetera. So I was at the bottom of the totem pole. So I said, well, maybe I extend for 2 years. So I joined the reserve. And in 1950, I was going to school in Philadelphia Institute of Criminology because I was a policeman at nighttime and a student in the day under the GI Bill.
Gotcha.
So when the war broke out in September of 1950, the Navy sent me a notice and said the next notice you receive, you had 24 hours of readiness. So I said, you know, my experience in the Navy, I can't drink all that water. Let me get on the ground. So I joined the Army.
Right.
And because I was a veteran of World War II,
right.
I only had to take 6 weeks of refreshment training.
Right.
So they sent me to Fort Dix, and I got to Fort Dix. They sent me out on Range Road, never forget it, which was completely segregated at that time. So all the African Americans stayed down on Range Road. You better not be caught up on main post after dark.
And that was basically because you're African American.
Yes,
correct?
definitely.
But white were allowed to have the freedom of the post, but not.
Oh yeah, not only white, but prisoners were.
Oh, that's interesting.
Prisoners were, but we couldn't.
Now that.
But you see, there's you know, I never fed into that.
Right.
Because you know, my philosophy has always been that positive thinking brings positive results.
Right.
So you don't feed into negativity. And I've seen so many African Americans that fed into it and were destroyed in the process.
I see. Now, getting up into Korea, the war starts in June of 1950, and you did not take place in the defense around the Pusan perimeter, but you did take place in the invasion of Incheon.
Yeah.
So pick up your military record from Incheon, which would have been September of 50 on.
At that particular time, they had what they call repo depots.
Mm-hmm.
That's where soldiers are in transit
Right,
from one point to another point in order to join a unit.
right.
So I went over on a ship, and when I got there, they sent me to this repo depot.
Mm-hmm.
So the colonel saw the stripes on my arm, and he called me over there, and he says, "You take your first 500 guys over there and get the Cosbeline off of their weapons, and get back to me, and I'll tell you what your perimeter is to cover for the night."
Right.
So I said, "Well, where's your front line at?" He said, "Right here." I said, "I'll be damned."
Now, you were with the 24th, and
20
at that time, the 24th Infantry was all colored at that
Oh,
time.
well, yeah, all black units with white officers.
Right,
They started to integrate slightly. A couple of companies had black officers,
mm-hmm.
but all of them was line officers, what they call line officers, below
Yeah.
the rank of colonel,
right.
okay? Or rather, I should say below the rank of mate.
And then you pushed north. Did you see a lot of combat then?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
We
explain-
lost a lot of men.
At that time, you're fighting the North Koreans.
Right, right.
Explain the combat there and what it was, what you were.
Well, you know what we had? We had what they call skirmishes.
Right, skirmish.
Yeah, and you fight it and take a hill, and then you move on, and you do maybe 4 or 5 skirmishes before you get to your destination. They put me in what they call S2, Infantry Intelligence.
Right.
So I had to make what they call contact patrols.
Mm-hmm.
I carried 9 men and 2 interpreters.
Right.
And I would infiltrate the line and find out the strength of the enemy,
Right.
and then and try to avoid my exposure
Mm-hmm.
or shooting and everything, and get out of there
Right.
and report my findings. So the battalion and upper echelon know what they're confronted with.
Correct.
So a lot of men, we lost them through hand grenades and booby traps
Mm-hmm.
and so forth, because they was known to booby trap the areas.
Right.
To make a long story short, we had the North Koreans beat, and we got up to the Yellow River
Yalu River.
at what they call Kunari,
Mm-hmm.
and the first cav was up there. Said, "Man, we ain't fired a shot in 3 days." I said, "Man, well, we got it made." Hey.
And you thought you were going to be home by Christmas. Right?
Yeah, right. So then, all of a sudden, all hell broke loose.
Chinese enter the war. 350,000 Chinese come across the Yalu River.
Them Chinese came across that border like a plague.
Now, just for the listening audience, from September until November, then you're pushing the North Koreans up.
Right,
And then this is under the orders of General MacArthur.
right.
Now, later on, with history being hindsight, 2020, many people felt he should not have pushed up there.
Right.
But at that time, you were just a soldier following.
Yeah, definitely. You know, your whole concept basically was survival of the fittest.
Right.
You know, hey, you weren't into that political plague.
Okay. November of 1950, the Chinese entered the war. How did the war change for you then?
Well, that's when the Chinese came across the border.
Right.
And they came over like a plague.
Mm,
They completely surrounded us.
right.
And that's when the captain, the CO, instructed us to break it up into small groups
Right.
to infiltrate the line
Mm-hmm.
and to join friendly forces.
Right.
And that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And my group was very fortunate. We got out of there.
Did you see human wave attacks?
Oh, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes,
What
with
was that like?
bayonets
Mm-hmm.
and hand grenades flying in the air,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and there was actually physical contact. There was no.
They were that close.
Hell yeah, definitely. Yeah.
In talking to other Korean War veterans, that's what they say. that part was very, very, like, it was crazy. It was
Oh
like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
There was 300,000, they were on you and things like
Right, and you know, and the fact is, these guys are little guys,
that.
you know, and it was cold.
Right. That's it.
It was 30 to 40 below zero.
Good, good. Now, we were talking about Korea, and the Chinese came in. We were talking about how cold it was. And at that point, what caused the desegregation of the United States Army at that time?
All of a sudden, President Truman executive order in 9981, complete desegregation in the service, when all units had to be integrated. And at that time, I was in the 24th Infantry Regiment, 25th Division, known as the Buffalo Soldiers. And the Buffalo Soldiers was from 1866 up until 1951, when they was under President Truman executive order there. And then when they deactivated them in September in 1951, they put in the 14th Infantry that was integrated. And that's when they sent me home. By that time, I had 18 months in Korea. I was ready to go.
Vietnam, which is basically 15, 20 years after your being in Korea. How did the military change for an African American in between Korea and Vietnam?
Well, the change started taking place under the President Truman executive order. However, a lot of units in the South didn't want to comply. So what the Department of the Army said, well, if it's off limits to blacks, it's off limits to whites. Therefore, it became an economical problem. Cash registers weren't ringing up. So they said, hey, come on in.
You were retrained, and in Vietnam you were a combat medic?
Yes, because I got frostbites and everything from the Korean War, and therefore I couldn't stay in what they call a picket fence. I was in total physical with all ones. So they sent me down to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and I was a senior non-commissioned officer, so I was the E7, so I had to go for 2 years for training. Then I wound up as an instructor down there for 3 years.
Now, you were talking about something prior to about the Martin Luther King pointing out an obvious fact that has bothered many people over the years.
Well, yeah, because while he was talking about the Martin Luther King said that the American population consists of 12% of African American, but yet there were 34% was dying in Vietnam. Well, this created a great problem because people started rioting and so forth. And in Saigon, they had a lot of African American in the stockade there. In fact, when they used to come, they come out to my training, out to my dispensary for treatment. I had to wear 2 guns. But I tell them, hey, I run this place here. You don't come in here and raid all that hell, because a lot of them be on. A lot of guys was on drugs and so forth, coming out of the field. Hey, and you know, he's not taking over this. I tell them, well, number one, you're a soldier. Act like one. Hey, act like a damn soldier. That's what you're trained for. And don't come in here like if he wanted my treatment. Yeah. I ran a medical facility. I had 12 doctors and 85 technicians. So I'm not going to tolerate it.
Now, Vietnam, and we were talking about how the Vietnam veteran came back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the healing of the Vietnam veteran, and to the point where many children and students, many kids have a hard time understanding why Vietnam veterans were treated badly.
Well, and the reason being is because, you know, we're trained differently. Okay, we love kids. I don't care what nationality they are. You try to help them. They're in Vietnam. You're giving the kids some candy out of your rations, and cookies and all out of your ration here, and here's another little kid in the back. You're trying to put a hand grenade in your gas tank. You know, a kid will only do what an adult tells them to do. You can't blame that kid. But you know, hey, you know yourself that, hey, I got to survive. I got to go home. I got a family. You see what I'm saying? So a kid get messed up in the process, all because the adults are forcing him to do something that he knows right enough for him to do.
Now,
And that's the reason why, through that misunderstanding, is the reason why they come home and say, well, hey, he's a baby killer. He said he killed kids and all. And all because they put the kids out front.
Vietnam is over, and basically you then came back. When did you separate from the service?
I retired in 1971.
And then what did you do?
Well, I went back to college again. In fact, I started right here, PCC.
Right.
And if you look at the Hall of Fame, from the Alumni Hall of Fame, you see my name, second name up there.
And what job did you take? What peacetime jobs did you take?
I was a teacher in the Department of Corrections. I retired as a principal, school principal.
Now, you're involved in a lot of organizations with a lot of positive programs that you've been involved in. So let's just talk about some of the things that you've been involved in your post-military experience.
Well, no, I became a veteran advocate because I knew what a veteran went through. I knew the price that he paid, and I thought he should have the best of everything. And I wanted to make sure he had that. And I went before the legislators, fight for veterans benefits. I organized in Burlington County the Burlington County Alliance, and my objective was to bring all the veterans organization under one umbrella for legislative purposes only. And in the process of doing so, we achieved a lot, I should say. Number one, are those who have 100% disability don't pay any property taxes in the state of New Jersey.
That was a good victory.
Yeah, I carried the guys before the legislators. I filled up the what's the name? What do you call it? The arena on top of the legislators. I filled it up with all you could see up there with veterans caps. You know, and we got a unanimous vote.
Now, you're on Operation Standby, which is a very good humanitarian effort. What is Operation Standby?
Well, Stand Down.
Stand Down, correct.
Stand Down is for the homeless veterans.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's too many veterans that have a tendency to feel that alcohol or drugs will alleviate their problem.
Right.
Which doesn't. It creates their problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought we should do everything we can to try to get them back to the fold.
Right.
And realize that those who are helping them went through the same thing that they went through. And you have to maintain an open mind and try to, help yourself when other people are trying to help you. And this is the philosophy that we use. And I would venture to say, I think the last statistics were that 2 out of 6 people that you see homeless are veterans. So,
What accounts for that? Do you think it was the drugs and alcohol and the problems of dealing with the post-wartime situations?
well, we just learned about post-traumatic stress. You know, when I was in World War II, they say we were shot out. That's the only term they had for it.
Now, I serve with BVAC with you, Burlington County Veterans Advisory Council, which we work with the freeholders. What are some other things that you've done over the years that you're proud of?
Well, I had the opportunity to go back to Germany. I go back to Korea in 2001 with Chris Todd Whitman on her economical trip to Asia.
And how did the Korean people treat you as a person who fought in their defense?
Oh my God, like I was a king. Unbelievable.
Now
And then when I step off the bus in Seoul, this colonel walks up and he says, "Who's Sergeant Yancey?" And Colonel Warner, who was in charge of our group, he says, "Here he is right here." And the colonel says, "My father was your platoon leader in 1950.
Wow.
He says, and he told me to take good care of you. I said, "I'll be a dirty bird."
Which is very interesting, because if we look at the wars that were fought in America, the term the forgotten war is usually pertained to in Korea.
Korea.
But you go to Korea and they are they're like amazing with the affection that they show to people who defended their country.
They, I think they're more grateful and appreciative than a lot of Americans, in virtue of the fact that they constantly look from where they came from to where they're at, which shows them, had it not been for the Americans, they wouldn't be there. And this is overwhelming. And they, like I met two Medal of Honor winners of South Korean soldiers. They took me and kept me for 3 or 4 days. And I just partied. I thought I was on another planet, But it was beautiful. But they're very appreciative. Americans.
If you were giving a message now, I guess I would ask this in different ways, and you look back on your life and your career, and you look back, and we'll focus on African American children, and what would you say to them? Would be any advice or anything that you would like them to know? What would you say to young African who are looking for role models? And we do have an absence, so to speak, of many role models in the African American community. What would you say? Because I would look at you as a role model.
Well, what I used to teach, especially in the correctional system, that number one, each of us are responsible for what we make of ourselves. You can't blame other people for your failures. You can't help people that are not willing to help themselves. And you only get out of life what you put into it. You don't put anything in, you don't get anything out. It's just that simple. And that you have to get rid of that slave mentality that somebody else is going to take care of me. You take care of yourself.
What about family and?
Yeah, I have 3 girls and 2 boys. I was married for 57 years. My wife passed away in 2008, and I had no problem with them. In fact, my grandkids. My oldest grandson is I think he's going to retire this year. He got 25 years in the state police. He's a captain in the state police.
Did any of your children or grandchildren follow your example?
From the military?
Yeah.
No, they didn't want no part of it. And I didn't blame them. He seek his own. You understand me? You don't push yourself on or your beliefs on anybody. Let them make the choice. My oldest son, he won a $35,000 scholarship at high school. He went to General Motors, Flint, Michigan. He became a draft engineer. In fact, he was a CEO of technology, and he just retired last year. He's 55. I asked him what he's going to do with the rest of his life. He said, play golf.
Now, I'd like to revisit World War II for a second. And I'd like you to kind of elaborate on World War II. You were talking a little bit about the role of women.
Yes, in our society, prior to World War II, the women looked at the men for security and for everything. World War II came, and believe me when I tell you that all the young people in every community that exists was drafted. The women taken over where the men were missing or absent. They went into the plants. They started making tanks. They're not making refrigerators no more. They're not making toasters. They're making Jeeps. They're making airplanes, etc. So it revolutionized our whole society. And I think it's good for the women because they have a lot more independency than they ever had before.
Now, if there one memory of combat in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, a combat memory, can you explain it's going to stay with you forever and why? Can you explain in detail?
I think when I was in Vietnam, and I had to go to 5 miles down the road to this to the ammunition depot that blew up, and I could hear the yelling and the hollering and so forth. And when I pulled in there, the colonel says to me, "How did you make it?" I said, "I don't know, sir, but we're here." The colonel said, "I want you to sit up in that Quonset hut over there." I said, "I don't want to sit up in that Quonset hut. I got to go underground." A half hour later, where he told me to sit up blue sky high. But my job is always to take care of the patient, make sure he's in a secure place. And if you abide by your training and so forth, hey, and I told I had to get some guys back down the road, and I put them on a 3/4 ton truck, and I shot them with morphine and put tourniquets on them and so forth. And I had the colonel said, "You can't go back down that road." I said, "Sir, I'm a senior medic here. I assume all responsibility." I didn't know the chaplain was there. The chaplain leaned over my shoulder and he said, "You're doing a hell of a job.
Right.
Don't let nobody stop you." I told the guy, "Get the hell down the road like I told you."
Right.
Hey, so anyway, to make a long story short, they gave me all kind of reward because I never lost a patient. I got every last one of them out of there. Hey, and I never forget how them guys looked at me. You know.
How was that to see an American soldier wounded? I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot.
Oh yeah.
What was that like, seeing those kids,
Yeah, that's
all
all
torn
I
up,
heard.
and you coming up to help them? What was that like?
I felt dynamic. I felt that, I had that power to alleviate their pain, to get them to settle down, and to assure them you got it made. You understand me? You're going home. We're going to still be here. And you're trying to inspire them to change their thinking and not to think it's all over.
Right.
It's just the beginning. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. In talking about race relations and promotions in American military, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, and I'm going to comment with relation to my own experiences.
Right.
So many was caught up in the same situation. I remember staying in grade 15 years before I could get promotion. And yet I was operating way above my grade. I could do the job, but I couldn't get paid. And I couldn't get promoted, which upset me. But and no matter how I fought to overcome it and I get people to understand, it was a battle because some would accept, some would reject. You understand me? And we'll come up with lame stories that.
So you're saying, by contrast, a white person, a white sailor or
Right.
soldier, would have had advancement many times over, and because of you being African American.
Sure. I've seen guys that were goofing up in the outfit, and the only way they could get rid of them was to promote them. I said, "You got to be kidding me."
And again, Mr. Yancey, I know how did this make you feel?
Well, hey, I felt real bad. I felt that unequality, and I felt the prejudice and so forth. And my constant was try to improve myself and try to make changes towards the acceptance of my services, and not keep on kicking me. You understand me?
And I think the amazing thing, and speaking as maybe one who would have reacted differently, you kept your dedication, you kept your patriotism, you kept your eye on the prize, and you just said, "Well, I'm just going to keep working hard," and that in itself is commemorative, right? You know what happened was that Benjamin L. Davis was the first black general in the Army. His son, Lieutenant General Davis, who was in charge of the Tuskegee Airmen, Willie Williams, and it was these people that inspired me to hang in there, because I know they had to go through the same thing I went through, or am I going through, and yet they were strong enough to hold in there and reach their goals or objectives. And that's what inspired me to do. If I was to say one of the most positive things that have ever happened to you in the military as a result of you being in the military. Could you focus on that?
Yes, my benefits and entitlements, such as me being able to get my education. I got my master's degree through the military. And my benefits and entitlements through the military.
My brother came home from Vietnam to a very unappreciative country. When you were finally sent home from Vietnam, what was it like when you returned home?
I didn't have no problem. I weighed 243 pounds.
You gained weight in Vietnam?
Yeah.
You're not the only person I know that gained weight in Vietnam. I'm going to end it now, and I'll let you say to give any message you'd like, or any way you'd like to salutate or end this, and then I'm going to. How would you like to end?
Well, I think the best way to end it is for the American people to be appreciative of a veteran, the prices he paid. And they tell you, give you all the statistics about those who died. And for everyone that they told you to die, they're not speaking about those who were wounded. And they take, well, the World War II is over, Korea's over for you. There's a lot of veterans out there carrying the wound, and they will carry it to their grave. That's the price that they paid for the freedom that you enjoy.
It's been my honor to really to interview you on behalf of Burlington County College and on behalf of the Armed Forces Heritage House and a grateful country. I want to shake your hand, Bob Yancey. It's an honor to know you. It's an honor to work with you, and I consider you a true hero.
My pleasure. I felt dynamic. I felt that, I had that power to alleviate their pain, to get them to settle down, and to assure them you got it made. You understand me? You're going home. We're going to still be here,